Okay, welcome to Gospel Backgrounds number 11. This video will be on John chapter 5 and the pools of Bethesda. We start every video with Acts 17:11. Now those Jews were more noble than those in Thessalonica, because although they received the word with all eagerness, they examined the scriptures daily to see if these things were so. So my application there is don't believe anything any commentator tells you. Be a diligent student and search the scriptures, and that goes for myself as well. Don't believe it just because I say it, but always want to back it up with scripture. This is a map of of Jerusalem at the time of Jesus. You can see letter E is where the pools of Bethesda are. They began excavating, I think, in the late 50s. And before then, people really didn't know whether John was historically accurate. Well, it turns out it's incredibly historically accurate, geographically accurate. What's interesting is that in the time of Jesus, if you can see the walls where it says Sheep Gate, the thicker black lines are where the walls were at the time of Jesus. There were later walls added. So even though today the pools are inside the city walls, back in Jesus' day, this area would have been outside the city walls. And that's just sort of an interesting a note that this man is really outside. The man who will soon be healed is kind of outside of society and a bit of an outcast. By way of an introduction to John chapter 5, I really liked this kind of setup. In the Satellite Bible Atlas Companion, Dr. Schagel writes, Jesus interrupted his ministry in Galilee when he came to Jerusalem for an unnamed festival. On a Sabbath at the pools of Bethesda, Jesus healed a man who had been lame for 38 years. These pools have been uncovered by archaeological excavations. The man had ineffectually waited for a superstitious healing, perhaps associated with Jewish mysticism or even the Roman god of healing Asclepius. The description in some Greek manuscripts in John 5 verses 3b to 4 of an angel of the Lord stirring the waters is an incorrect 4th century AD addition. After the miracle, Jesus claimed to not only have the power to heal, but to raise the dead. So with that introduction in mind, let's go ahead and dig into John chapter 5. All right, John chapter 5, verse 1. After this, there was a feast of the Judaioi, or it might say Jews in your Bible, but we'll translate that as Judaioi. That's the Greek word. And Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. And now here is where some manuscripts contain that the paralyzed were waiting for the moving of the waters, and then verse 5 in these manuscripts say, for an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool, stirred up the water. Whoever then first, after stirring up the water, stepped in was made well from whatever disease with which he was afflicted. We now know that verses 3b and 4 are not in the original and should not have been in the text, and we'll explain why as we go through. But let's pick up with verse 5. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, do you wish to be healed? All right, so let's break this down a little bit. It's interesting that John does not say which feast, but he just says a feast of the Jews. We remember that the term translated Jews, as I mentioned, is Judaioi, and depending on the context can refer to all Jews, as it probably does here, or any number of small subsets of Jews down to what may have been, only about 30 or 40 people controlling the Jerusalem temple establishment. Not too unlike our Congress and Senate, where you have a majority party and then a minority party kind of battling and arguing back and forth, but it's really a smaller group that's in control. As I mentioned, the English Standard Version and New Living and I think NIV, a lot of other modern translations correctly omit that verse that I read about the angel of the Lord stirring the waters. This actually apparently was inserted by a well-meaning scribe, but this is not in the most reliable older manuscripts. And in fact, it leads to an incorrect conclusion of what is going on. When understood correctly, I believe, it is Jesus and not some superstitious ritual that has the power to truly heal. So that's a key point. This wasn't an angel of the Lord doing God's work. This was either a superstitious manifestation, not too unlike our faith healers in Christianity, or it was flat out pagan temple of what is called Asclepius, which was the god of healing. So we'll get into that as we go through this video. Verse 5 says he was an invalid for 38 years. 38 years happens to be exactly the amount of time Israel spent wandering in the wilderness. Now, you may know that as 40 years, but what happened is they wandered for 2 years, and then at that point, the 12 spies were sent into the land. 10 came back with a bad report. Joshua and Caleb came back with a good report, and basically there was a rebellion that ensued. And as punishment, God says, well, you're not going to go in the land now. You're going to wander for 38 more years. So that's where we get a total of 40. But the punishment period of that was actually 38 years. The problem with verse 4, the angel of the Lord, is that it leads many scholars to conclude that the pool of Bethesda was somehow associated with Israel's God and the temple. And so one of the reasons I mentioned earlier that this was outside the city walls was to kind of break that up. If it was with the temple, it probably would have been something inside the city walls. So just something else to think about. So after these things, there was a feast of the Jews. So this is a picture of the Western Wall Plaza, and this is during the Feast of Sukkot. There were 3 compulsory feasts in Judaism that every able-bodied Jew was expected to attend. Those were Passover in the spring, Pentecost in the late spring, Feast of Weeks, and then the Feast of Tabernacles or Booths or Sukkot in September, early October timeframe. Some scholars believe that this unnamed feast in John chapter 5 was Passover. That seems maybe a little implausible because we'll be back in Passover in a few chapters from John, and then he just came back from Passover in John chapter 3 with Nicodemus. So that is a bit debatable. Ultimately, we don't know. Gordon Franz in the Lexham Geographic Commentary on the Gospels uses the chronology given in John chapter 4, being 4 verse 35, which is 4 months from the grain harvest. And then in John chapter 6, where Passover was at hand, he concludes that this is the February feast of Purim. And the only feast day of any of the feasts between AD 25 and AD 35 to land directly on a Sabbath was Purim in AD 28. So based on that, he concludes that this is Purim in AD 28. If this is a minor feast, as I mentioned, only attendance at major feasts was compulsory, so why would Jesus be at a minor feast? Ultimately, we don't know. This is speculation, but in John chapter 10, we'll see that Jesus observed Hanukkah. And what in our Bible says the Feast of Dedication in winter, that can only be Hanukkah, and that is a minor feast and is not required to attend either, but yet Jesus went to that one too. So, interestingly, Purim is a time where Jews are expected to give gifts and perform acts of service to the poor. And so that's exactly what Jesus will do. We'll see that in a few verses. This is a picture looking from the Mount of Olives. So we're looking down onto the Temple Mount. You can see the current eastern wall, and right under the M of Temple Mount, those are the eastern gates or the golden gates. Off to the my right, you can see St. Stephen's Gate, and then as soon as you enter, this is a path that pilgrims take even today. They get my pointer here. They will come down the basically the Palm Sunday Road, and then you'll cross here, Garden of Gethsemane, and then you'll kind of climb up this hill, and then you'll enter through St. Stephen's Gate. So this is the Garden of Gethsemane down here, Kidron Valley here, and the old city wall of Jerusalem is right here. So you walk in, there is a St. Anne's Church, which is from the Crusader time, and then right adjacent to that are where they have located the pools of Bethesda. This is a model of what they believe the pools look like. So you see 5 colonnades. The rectangle, if you can, consider that, and then the one in the middle would be the 5th colonnade. What threw archaeologists was they were looking for a 5-sided pool, like a pentagon type of shape, but that's actually not what they found. They found this model, not the, they didn't find the model. They found the pools in this shape. So the thought was that in the center portico, that right through here, that people, that's where the people were waiting to be healed. This is an aerial shot, so you can see here's the St. Anne's Crusader Church, and then a little difficult to see, but basically way down, probably 50 or 60 feet below the surface area of the church is where they believe they have found these pools, and there's the excavated portion and all that. One thing that makes it tough on archaeologists is that if we're trying to find something from the time of Jesus, well, kind of a lot's happened since then. You had the, first of all, the city was leveled in AD 70, so the Romans completely filled it in with dirt and then rebuilt on top of it. And then you had the Byzantine period, where that was the Christian period of Jerusalem, where a lot of churches were built. And then you had a Muslim period where a lot of that was torn down, and then Muslim structures were built. And then for about 200 years, you had the Crusader period, so about roughly 10,000 to 1,000 AD to 1200 AD is the Crusader period, and there's back and forth all in there. But then the Crusaders built their structures, and then following that was the second Muslim period. So there's a lot of building and going on, and you can imagine that one religious group doesn't particularly care for buildings from another religious group, so those get torn down and buried and whatnot. So you can see the structures here. The central portico is pictured on the right side of this photo, and then in the Byzantine period, a church was built. So that's why if you look at it today, you say, well, I don't really see any pools. You kind of have to visualize it without all these other structures. Now there is in Jerusalem by the Sheep Gate a pool called Bethesda. This is another view looking, so we pulled away from the previous shot, and now we're kind of getting a bigger picture view. The site was a center of a Roman healing cult of the god Asclepius. There's some commentaries that will say, well, that was later, that was several centuries after Jesus where that happened. It does appear that this site is built upon an earlier Asclepian. So they have identified more than 400 of these throughout the Roman Empire. So kind of a big cult god where people would go to be healed. And so what we believe would happen, and really nothing supernatural, more sleight of hand than anything, there would be pagan priests situated in the upper of the pool. So you remember in that model there were two pools. The priests would be up there, then they would occasionally randomly, magically open pipes to have water flow from the upper portion to the lower portion. Lo and behold, the water stirred, and it's a miracle. I have no idea how people got healed because of that, but you know, that's what they believed happened. You may not have heard of Asclepius, but you may have heard of his two mythical daughters, Hygeia and Panacea. And so that is where we get our healing related words, hygiene and panacea. And it's quite interesting to me that the symbol of Asclepius is a snake wrapped around a pole, which is likely a corrupted version of Moses lifting up the bronze serpent in the wilderness, which we've talked about in previous videos, and we'll talk about again at the end of this video. So if you're wondering where modern medicine gets its snake imagery, well, now we know it's kind of rooted in Greek paganism. So there's your thought for the day. This is written by Justin Martyr in early Christianity. When the devil brings forward Asclepius as the raiser of the dead and healer of all diseases, may I not say that in this matter likewise he has imitated the prophecies about Christ? And that's Justin Martyr. And so in John chapter 5, what we see is Jesus exerting his superiority over Asclepius and pagan type of healing. So why bring up all this about Asclepius? I believe that the complexion of the story changes once we realize the man is also paralyzed spiritually. He is seeking healing from a false god. And so these waters can't heal him, right? Only the pure water of Jesus can. And incidentally, this is John chapter 5. In John chapter 2, we had the water to wine. In John chapter 3, we had the conversation with Nicodemus about living water. And also in John chapter 4, we had the conversation about with the woman in the well about, again, the living water. So are you seeing a theme of water in the early chapters of the Gospel of John? And of course, the $64,000 application question is, how often do we seek healing from the world apart from Jesus? And so that's exactly what this man is doing. So we may seek medical, financial, marital help, whatever, from the world around us, and forget to tap into the main source of living water, the one who can truly heal us, and that is Jesus. All right, back to John chapter 5. The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me in the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Euodioi said to the man who had been healed, "It is the Sabbath. It is not lawful for you to take up your bed." But he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, 'Take up your bed and walk.'" They asked him, "Who is this man who said to you, 'Take up your bed and walk'?" Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn, as there was a crowd in this place. Jesus does no other physical motion as he does with other healing. What's interesting is the man thought he had to get up and get down into the water to be healed, and Jesus just simply speaks and he is healed. Not too unlike the healing of the Capernaum official in chapter 4. He simply speaks and it is so. It seems the Euodioi here are also blind and paralyzed because they want to get up in an argument about what is lawful and not lawful on the Sabbath. What's interesting is there's one commentary I was reading says there was robust debate about what is and is not allowed on the Sabbath. Even to this day within Judaism, the certain groups say, well, you can't do any of these things, and other groups say, well, you can do some of these things. This is really not a surprise because even our church is like that, right? So our churches have debates about whether casual dress is okay or whether we need to put on our Sunday best, right? Or whether organ music is better or whether casual dress and rock music is okay. And other groups will think, well, rock music's of the devil, so why would we want it in our church? So we still have these arguments today. The point is, nothing is new under the sun, right? Every religion has rules that we want to insert and rules with good intent, right? We believe that these will help us be more in a posture of worship, but certainly rules can go too far and prevent people who need to hear the message from actually hearing the message. Most Jews believe that in the face of a direct threat to life, healing on the Sabbath was certainly allowed, and there's actually provisions in the Torah that allow for this. In this situation, though, there was not a direct threat. The man was just kind of lingering there. What seems to be more in view here are the rules regarding carrying, though. There's some carrying where you can carry certain things on the Sabbath and you can't carry other things. One commentator noted that the Euodioi here may have been seeking to impose a standard of morality regarding carrying that was not widely accepted, just like the standards of dress in our church are not accepted today. It's important to note, though, that Jesus was not attempting to overturn the rules of the Sabbath. He did not come to destroy the Sabbath. In Matthew 24, Jesus says, "When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." And then in verse 20, he says, "Pray that your flight may not be on the Sabbath." In other words, Jesus is actually affirming the prohibitions against extended travel and carrying of possessions on the Shabbat. So that is not what's going on here. Basically, we actually don't know why Jesus said, "Take your mat and walk," other than perhaps to call attention to have this discussion, or he knew, he kind of wanted to have a discussion with the Euodioi about this. So leaving that aside, the Euodioi kind of dropped that line of questioning, and their attention quickly turns now to Jesus himself. A mat just may have been a papyrus mat or a woven mat of some kind, kind of like our beach mats that you may have seen that are made of straw or whatever. So very simple. They were carried, and one thing that's in view is this mat may have been this man's only possession. If he was there every day, that may have been all he had. In which case, if that's all you had, then you were certainly allowed to carry it. He may have been homeless too. So we just don't know. If we compare the other pool healing, we find that in John chapter 9. Jesus told that man to wash in the pool of Siloam. He does not do that here with the pools of Bethesda. And so this kind of adds support to the speculation that this pool of Bethesda was a pagan or superstitious place, whereas we're pretty sure that the pool of Siloam, which we'll get to in a few weeks, was connected with water for the Jerusalem temple. So very much one is associated with the temple and one is pagan in nature. John 5, verse 14, afterward Jesus found him in the temple. That's good. He knew what to do. He went to the temple and prayed or whatever, and said to him, see, you are well. Congratulations, you're well. And sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. The man went away and then told the Judaioi that it was Jesus who had healed him. So one thought is that if the pools of Bethesda were a pagan place, Jesus is basically saying, don't have any other gods before Israel's God. It is Israel's God who's healed you. You claim to be Jewish, and yet here you are at this pagan place. So otherwise, the statement about the man's sin would seem uncharacteristic, right? There's no specific sin stated, and we know from other passages that physical debilities are not usually punishments for sin. Jesus said that. So this man appears to have succumbed to some superstitious worship or some kind of faith healing kind of center instead of keeping his eyes focused on Jesus. Now focused on Jesus and then the Lord of Israel. Jesus declares his redeeming kinship by finding the lost sheep of Israel. I mentioned that in, I think, the last video. That was his primary mission, was to seek to seek out the lost sheep of Israel. And here is one here that he retrieved and saved. And this is why the Judaioi were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, my Father is working until now, and I am working. This is why the Judaioi were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. All right, a lot going on here. Certainly with this healing, the authority and influence of the temple establishment is clearly being threatened. Jesus is a threat. We saw something similar here in the United States starting in 2016 with someone who was perceived as a threat to the political establishment, and that establishment stopped at nothing to take that person down, even after that person left office. So they want no part of him. They want him gone. And so really there's nothing new under the sun. Whenever someone is perceived as a threat to the establishment, then that person needs to be taken out. Our commentaries typically read verse 16 as he was doing these things on the Sabbath. One commentary that I was reading says it's better to read this as he was doing these things on the Sabbath. So do you hear the difference in that? It's not when Jesus was doing, it's what he was doing. His incredible miracle working power here was a clear threat to the Judaioi, the religious establishment. So the way that the Judaioi, or the establishment, attempted to discredit him was to say that Jesus was a Sabbath breaker, and even worse, he was a blasphemer. If someone claimed to be the Messiah of Israel and violated any one of Israel's commandments, let alone the 2 of the 10 biggies, right? The 10 commandments, one of which is keeping the Sabbath, and the other one is blasphemy. You shall not blaspheme. That person would not be a true Messiah. So they were trying to discredit him that way. But since we know that Jesus is the Messiah, we know he cannot have been a Sabbath breaker. So again, that's I'm sorry to harp on this, but it's that Gentile-Jew divide that didn't happen until the 2nd and 3rd centuries. that people want to read back into the Gospel of John, and that's just an anachronism. So Jesus worked fully within Judaism. He fully kept the law. He says he did not come to abolish the law, but to complete it. He'll say that in Matthew. So these accusations were just false pretenses by the establishment, who just really feared Jesus. That was their biggest threat. Jesus' response is that God rested on the original seventh day, but basically he says, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." What we think he means there is babies are born every day of the week, including Saturday, including Shabbat. And the law actually allows for a boy born on a Friday to be circumcised on the following 8th day, which would have been a Shabbat, signifying that that child is entering into the covenant with the God of Israel. So if all that can happen, then surely God works to favor life on the Sabbath. Healing on the Sabbath was not something that violated the Torah. We believe that's what Jesus is saying here. He is working, doing his Father's business 7 days a week, including on Shabbat. If we view Jesus as one who came to break the Sabbath, then I would caution that we're aligning ourselves with those on the wrong side of the argument, right? That's what his enemies accused him of. They accused him of being a Sabbath breaker. So Jesus could not be everything that John said he was in terms of his deity and his majesty, and let alone the Messiah of Israel if he was to be a Sabbath breaker. Last comment there, it says they accused him of making himself equal with God. We know that in Philippians 2:6, Paul writes, Jesus did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. In John 14:8, Jesus says, the Father is greater than I. So in terms of his humanity, Jesus is not equal to God. So that's just another false charge that the Judaic are trying to cook up. All right, some pictures. Afterward, Jesus found the now healed man in the temple. This is a model that is at the Israel Museum. It's a huge, I forget the exact scale, but it's a very large model of what they think Jerusalem looked like in the Second Temple period. And I've called out there the southern temple steps. You can see the two main entrances are here and here, and one was for going in and the other one was for coming out. This area is really cool. It's a highlight of many people's trip to Israel. It's been excavated, and you can go there today. And kind of what I have in the picture is this archway here is I don't know if it's hard to see on the video, but there's a remnants of an arch and then a later structure that was built adjacent to it. But this area is special because 99.999% sure Jesus would have had to have walked on these very steps, and these steps date to the to the 1st century. So these would have been the steps that Jesus used to enter and exit the temple. There's actually a story that in 1994, Neil Armstrong, the astronaut, visited these steps, and he reportedly was overcome with emotion because he said that walking where his Savior walked was an even more exciting moment for him than walking on the moon. So while I can't attest to walking on the moon, I can attest to how cool and how powerful it is to be on these steps, visit these steps today, and then we usually have a teaching related to something with the temple or Jesus being presented after he was born or something like that. So very, very cool area that we can visit today. So Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you. Jesus begins a parable here of sorts, a parable of an apprentice, if you want to look at it that way. What's interesting here is that this verses 19 to 31 form a literary unit called a chiasm, with verses 24 and 25 at the center. I'm not going to get into that here, but just chiasm is a form of a symmetric poetry. So if you were to look at verse 19, you would see a parallel with verse 31. So I'm just going to go ahead and read 19 through 31 straight through, and then on your own, you can go back and try and find out some of these parallels. So Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing. And greater works than these will he show you, so that you may marvel. 21. For as the Father raises the dead and gives them life, so also the Son gives life to whom he will. For the Father judges no one, but he has given all judgment to the Son, that all may honor the Son just as they honor the Father. Whoever does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. Truly, truly, I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. He does not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life. Verse 25, truly, truly, I say to you, an hour is coming and is now here, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. For as the Father has life in himself, so he granted the Son also to have life in himself. And he has given him authority to execute judgment, because he is the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this, for an hour is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and come out, those who have done good to the resurrection of life, and those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment. I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. This is a picture of the rolling stone tombs that were common in the first century. Basically, these are up near Megiddo. You actually can find these rather commonly around Israel. It's very cool. This tomb dates approximately to the 1st century A.D. The right side was destroyed during construction activities, but you can see the original entrance and the stone are intact. So it provides a good illustration of what the tomb of a rich man would look like. The poor could not afford rock-hewn tombs, so this would be a rich man's tomb. All right, to wrap up the chapter, Jesus talks about very much witness and testimony, and John very much has a courtroom feel that is, you just don't find that in the other Gospels. So he is testifying about Jesus. He's almost writing an affidavit or as if you were depositioned, and then on a witness stand. That's the gospel writer's point of view there. If I alone bear witness about myself, my testimony is not true. There is another who bears witness about me, and I know that the testimony that he bears about me is true. You sent to John, meaning John the Baptist, and he has borne witness to the truth. Not that the testimony I receive is from man, but I say these things so that you may be saved. He was a burning and shining lamp, and you were willing to rejoice for a while in his light. But the testimony that I have is greater than that of John. For the works that the Father has given me to accomplish, the very works I am doing, bear witness about me that the Father has sent me. So what we're going to have is a total of 3 witnesses, and we'll save the star witness is for the last section. But in verse 33, we have the witness of John the Baptist. In verse 36, we have the witness of Jesus' works. So in other words, that the healing of the man earlier in the chapter is evidence that Jesus has God's approval. So the works are his witness. And then we'll have some pictures about this, and then we'll wrap it up in a few slides. This is a 1st century oil lamp. That's just what they look like. So when you hear stories of all through Scripture and even in the Old Testament, thy word is a lamp. The Torah is a lamp. This is the type of oil lamp that would have been in use during those days. Verse 37, and the Father who sent me has himself borne witness about me. His voice you have never heard, his form you have never seen. And you do not have his word abiding in you, for you do not believe the one whom he has sent. You search the Scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. It is they that bear witness about me. Yet you refuse to come to me that you may have life. I do not receive glory from people, but I know that you do not have the love of God within you. So the 3rd witness there would be the Torah itself. The fact that the Scriptures speak of Jesus, and we'll see some examples of that in a few slides. This is a man reading the Torah scroll at the Western Wall, The Torah scrolls are often decorated beautifully. You can see the kind of rather ornate, so you can almost see the veneration that they give to the Torah, which is good. That's good. But the point is that Jesus says, "You have the scriptures which testify of me." Jesus goes on to say that the scriptures bear witness. So remember, the scriptures he's referring to were what we would call the Old Testament. So it's kind of a sad commentary that many Christians would discount the value of the Old Testament. While none other than Jesus says those 39 books of the Old Testament are all about him. Verse 43, I've come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another comes in his own name, you will receive him. How can you believe when you receive glory from one another and do not seek the glory that comes from the only God? Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moses, on whom you have set your hope. For if you believe Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote of me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? So the Judaioi, the establishment, they're interested in really earthly political power, and they seek to be admired by the people. And yet that's not Jesus' approach at all. And yet, despite all this, Jesus says his job is to save. And he actually, in a previous verse, on a previous slide, he offers them salvation if they would only believe. I forgot to call that out. But Jesus' job is to save. In his first coming, Jesus' job is to save and not condemn. Again, another picture of a Torah scroll unrolled. And so they would unroll the scroll and find the section that they want to read and then roll it up again. So you can see that it's actually parchment, leather type of parchment, very carefully and meticulously written, and then preserved on wooden scrolls. So Jesus says, if you had believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote of me. And we talked about this before, the simple serpent symbol that is on Mount Nebo. The serpent that Moses lifted up in the wilderness saved people from snake bites. You find that in Numbers 21:4. Jesus compared that to him, though. He was the one who would be lifted up on a cross. He would save his followers from eternal death brought about by another serpent in Genesis 3. So we find that in John 3. Gordon Franz notes that in John 3, Jesus likened himself to the serpent in the wilderness. In a few weeks, we'll get to John chapter 6 and the feeding of 5,000 in Galilee, where Jesus will liken himself to manna in the wilderness. So we have the miraculous feeding of the 5,000, and Jesus compares himself to the manna that fell from heaven during those wilderness wanderings. So basically, it's clear by those two stories that Moses wrote of him. Dr. Lazorkin writes that the chief prosecutor in Israel was Moses, and then another commentator, Daniel Lancaster, concludes that if the chief prosecutor is Moses, then the star witness is the Torah itself, because God testified through the Torah regarding the person of Messiah. All right, that's it for this journey through John chapter 5. We will see you on the next video.